Last month, Microsoft announced a $50 billion investment in AI data centers over the next 2 years. That's more than the GDP of half the countries on Earth, dedicated entirely to physical infrastructure. Google committed $40 billion, Amazon another $30. These aren't R&D budgets. This is concrete, steel, power grids, and cooling systems. And here's what nobody's asking. Where's the actual return on this supposed investment to come from? Because right now, we're watching the largest infrastructure build-out in tech history, and the math behind it doesn't work. Let's start with what these companies are actually building. When Microsoft says $50 billion in data centers, they're not talking about office space. They're talking about massive warehouses filled with specialized chips called GPUs. Each one of these facilities can consume as much power as a small city. The newest data center Meta is building in Louisiana will pull 1.5 gigawatts of electricity. That's enough to power 1 million homes. And they need this scale because training and running AI models is absurdly expensive. OpenAI reportedly spends $700,000 per day just keeping ChatGPT operational. That's over $250 million a year in compute costs alone. Google's DeepMind spent an estimated $100 million training their Gemini Ultra, one training run. If it fails or needs updating, you pay again. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. The revenue side of this equation is nowhere near the cost side. ChatGPT has roughly 200 million weekly active users. Impressive number, but most of them use the free version. OpenAI charges $20 a month for ChatGPT Plus. Even if we're generous and assume 20 million paying subscribers, which is almost certainly too high, that's $400 million in annual revenue from subscriptions, against an estimated operating costs exceeding $2 billion per year. The gap is staggering. And OpenAI isn't alone. Anthropic, the company behind Claude, raised $7.5 billion over the past 2 years. Not because they're profitable, they're not. They raised it because they need that capital just to stay competitive in the training arms race. Every time a competitor releases a more capable model, you need to match it or risk irrelevance. And matching it means spending another $100 million on compute. So where's the money actually coming from? Not customers, investors. Microsoft invested $13 billion into OpenAI. Google invested $2 billion into Anthropic. Amazon put $4 billion in as well. These aren't normal venture bets. These are strategic subsidies. The cloud providers are essentially funding the AI labs because those labs train their models on the cloud provider's infrastructure. Microsoft benefits when OpenAI spends $1 billion on Azure compute credits. Amazon benefits when Anthropic burns through AWS resources. It's a closed loop where the infrastructure companies are both the investors and the customers. And that loop only works as long as the promise of future revenue justifies the present costs. But let's talk about what future revenue actually looks like. The dream scenario for AI companies is that enterprises, banks, insurance firms, logistics firms will pay millions per year for customized AI systems, and some will. But here's the problem. The cost to serve those customers is rising faster than the price AI companies can charge. Sequoia Capital published an analysis estimating that the AI industry needs to generate $600 billion in revenue to justify the current infrastructure investments. Right now, the entire sector generates maybe $30 billion annually, and most of that is cloud compute revenue, meaning the infrastructure providers are essentially paying themselves. That's a 20-to-1 gap between what's being spent and what's coming back. Now, the tech industry has seen this pattern before. Amazon lost money for years building out AWS infrastructure. Eventually, they achieved scale and profitability followed. The AI companies are betting on the same trajectory. They believe costs will come down as chips get more efficient, as training methods improve, as economies of scale kick in. Except the opposite is happening. Every new generation of AI models requires more compute, not less. GPT-4 was significantly more expensive to train than GPT-3. Google's Gemini required even more resources than GPT-4. The trend line is moving in the wrong direction. Yes, inference, actually running the models, is getting cheaper per query, but training costs are exploding. and training happens continuously now. These models aren't static products. They require constant updates, fine-tuning, and alignment work. And then there's energy. AI data centers are consuming so much electricity that utility companies in Virginia, Texas, and Iowa are scrambling to build new power plants just to meet demand. Some facilities are negotiating directly with nuclear plants to secure dedicated energy supplies. Google's total electricity consumption increased nearly 50% in the past 2 years, driven almost entirely by AI infrastructure. This creates a bizarre situation where the companies building AI are also becoming energy companies by necessity. Microsoft is reportedly looking into deals to restart decommissioned nuclear reactors. Amazon is buying into small modular reactor technology. These aren't side projects, they're existential requirements. Because if you can't secure dedicated power, you can't scale. And if you can't scale, you fall behind in the arms race. So we arrive at the core question. What happens when this investment cycle stops? Right now, the big tech companies can afford to subsidize AI development because they have profitable core businesses. Microsoft has Office and Azure. Google has search ads. Amazon has e-commerce and AWS. They're using cash from those operations to fund AI infrastructure at a loss, betting it will eventually pay off. But what if it doesn't? What if the cost curve never bends in their favor? What if the business model for AI remains what it is today? Expensive to build, expensive to run, and hard to monetize at scale. Then we're looking at the most expensive science project in corporate history. $500 billion in infrastructure, chips, data centers, power systems, built on the assumption that someone, eventually, will figure out how to make it profitable. The companies making these bets aren't stupid. They see risks we don't. They have data we'll never access. Maybe they're right. Maybe training costs plateau. Maybe inference gets cheap enough that AI becomes a true mass market product with healthy margins. Maybe enterprises start spending tens of billions of dollars annually on AI services. Or maybe we're watching the largest capital misallocation since the fiber optic bubble of the late 90s, when telecom companies spent hundreds of billions of dollars laying cable that no one needed yet. Most of those companies went bankrupt. The infrastructure remained. Someone else eventually used it. The difference this time is that AI infrastructure isn't passive cable in the ground. It's active systems burning electricity and capital every single day. The carrying cost of being wrong is much, much higher. So, when Microsoft writes a check for $50 billion, they're not just building data centers, they're making a bet that the future value of AI will justify the present costs. And right now, no one actually knows if that bet pays off.